What a nice picture.
You mean all of us?
Yeah. Naomi, you're on mute.
I know that was intentional because I was speaking to Deacon Ash.
Okay, I see. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
So you can hear me okay, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to put everybody on mute,
Okay.
and I'm going to ask the speakers to unmute yourselves. Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Reamer, operating Devarim, and welcome to Policy and Politics, which is our effort to learn about the work and perspectives of members of the Tiferet Israel congregation in various realms of public policy and politics. Tonight's topic is climate policy and advocacy, which is co-sponsored with the TI Green Committee. Thank you, Carla Ellern, and we will hear from Carla at the end of the event. So we have three speakers tonight. Fred Lipschultz is a senior staff scientist at the U.S. Global Change Research Program, an interagency federal effort to understand the forces shaping the global environment and their impacts on society. And Fred in particular works on the National Climate Assessment, which he'll tell us about. Joelle Novi, who is going to be joining us momentarily because she's coming off another meeting, is Director of Interfaith Power and Light for Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. And Interfaith Power and Light works with hundreds of congregations of many faiths across the region to save energy, go green, and respond to climate change. And Rabbi Devorah Lin is a member of the steering committee of the Jewish Earth Alliance, which is a grassroots network of communities working across America to raise a loud collective voice for federal climate policies that reflect Jewish values. Those are our three speakers. Our moderator is Naomi Friedman, who is, her day job is the National Coordinator of Disaster Recovery and Resilience at the Economic Development Administration in the U.S. Department of Commerce. And before joining EDA, Naomi was involved with the Sustainable Communities Initiative at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And any opinions that Naomi expresses tonight are hers alone and should not be taken to reflect the policies or perspectives of EDA or the Commerce Department. In the first half hour, so we'll break this up roughly into three 30-minute segments. In the first half hour, our speakers will tell us about the what and the why of their work, particularly its connection to Jewish values. In the second half hour, Naomi will facilitate a conversation among the three speakers and with her. And then in the last half hour, we'll open the conversation up to your questions, which you can submit through the chat. We'll continue our past practice, which is we're going to keep everybody on mute and ask you to submit your questions to Naomi and me in the chat, and then we'll pick them and have a conversation. At the end, unlike or different from the prior events, Joelle is going to be leading you through a process of being able to sign up to work with several of these organizations to promote climate change policies that will save us going forward. So with that, I will get out of the picture literally, and Naomi, please take it away.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for joining this evening. Just to briefly set the stage, with President Biden indicating climate change is one of his top priorities, there really is growing hope that our country will be able to take real action on this dire problem, and certainly not a moment too soon. Last year, there were so many hurricanes and tropical storms, the National Hurricane Center ran out of approved names and had to start using the Greek alphabet to name these storms. Our nation is spending billions on disaster response and recovery, and we are clearly unprepared for the effects of climate change. So I am going to turn to you, Fred, first to help us begin the discussion. I'm wondering if you could please share with us your connection to climate change work and also how being a Jew influences your approach to this issue.
Thank you, Naomi. So as with Naomi's disclosure, anything I say is my own personal opinion. I am a contractor and I don't speak for the federal government and all of those usual disclaimers. So I work on a range of things for this organization that is put into law by Congress 30 years ago. Hard to believe it's been around that long. And it was actually an organization that was put in place by unanimous vote of the Senate. So that again tells you something about a difference in the last 30 years on climate change. And we coordinate all federal climate research across the federal agencies for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is part of the White House. And so in that role, we also produce something every 4 years called the National Climate Assessment, which is the highest level of reports produced by the federal government that surveys the entire swath of everything to do with climate and its impacts and responses by the nation. So it's like the international reports, climate assessments that you've probably heard of, but this one is focused totally on how all of it affects the United States. And so our last one came out on Black Friday. We call it the Black Friday Report in 2018. And the next one is due out in 2022, 23, depending. And so we're cranking up now and getting started on that. So I think in the later in the presentation, we'll have a link if you want to look at that as a place to find authoritative climate information to understand better how the nation's going to be impacted. I also work on something called the Climate Resilience Toolkit, which is a NOAA product and includes something called the Climate Explorer, where you can use things there to actually drill down and understand at a much smaller level down to the county scale of what kinds of changes we can look forward to or actually try to avoid in the future. So that's sort of some of the climate pieces that I work on. A lot of things about climate science and details and getting it out to the public, trying to build our adaptation and resilience responses across the agencies. And we are all very much looking forward to what's happening in the Biden administration after the previous guy. Two things I wanted to say is, in particular, is to mention some of the executive orders. So there was an executive order that was entitled Restoring Science to Tackle the Climate Crisis. And that one had a whole range of things. And the main one that I wanted to mention there that I'll probably will come up later is a piece on restoring the accounting. It's called Accounting for the Benefits of Reducing Climate Pollution. It basically looks at something called the social cost of carbon. And that is going to be hugely influential as we move forward. So I'll probably talk about that again later in the discussion. And the other one that is very consequential for climate change is Executive Order 14008, called Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. And as part of that, it also reinstates one of the Obama level executive orders, presidential memos, sorry, that also ties climate change to national security. And the purpose of that one, of this executive order, is quite broad, and it has some very interesting pieces. One is it directs the Director of National Intelligence to prepare a national intelligence estimate on the national and economic security impacts of climate change. This goes far beyond where the federal government's gone in the past, which is quite interesting, and to produce a climate risk analysis for wargaming and other things. So really diving deep into what that's going to mean overseas. It also sets up the Department of Homeland Security to look at the implications of climate change in the Arctic along our nation's borders and national critical functions. And one can just think about Texas in the last week to see what that would mean. But again, it's looking outward and inward at our national security, which is interesting. Another thing this particular one does is it sets up a White House office on domestic climate policy, a first, and that's the one that Gina McCarthy is leading. And as part of her job, she's going to set up a national climate task force. These are all new things we didn't have under Obama or ever before. And the charges of these things are extremely wide-ranging. Basically everything that the federal government touches, and that includes engagement with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, workers, communities, and leaders across all sections of our economy, reading from the actual text. All departments have 120 days to submit a draft action plan, not just fooling around, but an action plan on climate action to improve adaptation and increase resilience. The agencies are required then to assist state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, communities, and businesses in preparing for and adapting to climate change. It sets up a civilian climate corps, like the Civilian Conservation Corps back of the 30s during the Great Depression. This will be the Civilian Climate Corps. It also sets up a big topic for the entire administration is climate justice. So it sets up, as part of the Council of Environmental Quality, CEQ, has within 6 months of the date of this order to create an environmental justice screening tool for climate and economic justice. And that shall annually publish maps highlighting the disadvantaged communities affected by climate. It also sets up an office, this one in Health and Human Services. It sets up a separate office of climate change and health equity. Another huge difference from previous administrations, and really reflects the interest of this administration in equity and justice issues. And so that one also includes a separate interagency working group on climate change impacts to children, the elderly, people with disabilities, and vulnerabilities. So this is a wide-ranging thing, and within the federal government right now, what we're seeing is it's still at a very high level. Most of these task force have not met yet, or will meet, have met once, and have a Brady Bunch picture of everybody kind of all in there. You see pictures with Gina McCarthy, John Kerry, Pete Buttigieg, and all of them meeting for the first time just in the last week. And so there's going to be a rapid ramping up of all of us who work or connected to the federal government over the next 6 months to respond to this. And I just read a few of the ones that I thought would be most interesting in this executive order, but it goes on and on, there's just going to be a tremendous churn of meetings and activities and panic among federal agency people over the next few weeks to understand how to respond to this. And I think I'll leave it there, Naomi, and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Fred. That was a great review. Joelle, could you please share your perspective, your work, and how your Judaism influences what you do?
Sure, it's great to be here. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. You'd think that I wouldn't be late for anything anymore now that it's all on Zoom, but I still manage to sometimes be running late, sorry. My work is that I direct Interfaith Power and Light, DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia. So we are working with congregations like Tifereth Israel all over the region to find their response to climate change. And it's been my pleasure to work with a lot of you and with TI for many years in that work. We are one of about 36 similar organizations responding to climate change as a religious issue all over the country. And I come to this as someone who I've been doing this for over a decade now, almost every weekend. And I come to the climate crisis only more passionate every day about the critical role that our religious communities have to play in this fight. When we talk about climate change in our faith communities, people hear it differently. This has become a hopelessly politicized issue and something which people have trouble talking about and have trouble talking about in a way that that they can hear. But when we talk about climate change in our congregations, people listen differently. They listen with their moral ears, is what I like to say, right? People, I don't have to say explicitly when I'm giving a Devar Torah about climate change, I don't have to say I am reframing this as a moral issue, but when people hear conversations about what's happening to our climate in the place where they hear Divrei Torah, they hear it as a matter of right and wrong, about the choices we are making impacting our neighbors. It's about doing right by each other, doing right by people around the world, doing right by future generations, doing right by the natural world. So I just want to thank you for having a conversation about climate change here at TI tonight, and just to know that every time we open a conversation about these issues and in a moral context and with the communities that care about what we think and care about how we feel, we're doing the critical work of making it possible to respond. When I think about I think a lot about what does it mean to be motivated Jewishly in responding to the climate crisis. And I have different answers for that on different days. One thing I'll share tonight is I think about, nothing can really prepare us we are in an unprecedented moment in human history where people are now the driving force behind our global climate. And that's never been true before, ever. So sometimes it feels a little lonely. There's nothing exactly in the Torah that is for this moment, because our ancestors could not imagine a world in which human beings were the driving force behind the climate. That said, I think there are some things from our tradition that can sustain us and guide us in this unprecedented time. And one of the things that I love is the discourse around pikuach nefesh, when it is okay to violate Shabbat to save a life. And Rabbi Fred Sherlinder-Dabb from Adat Shalom has put together a series of texts that show the way this idea gets more and more expansive. So it says, what do you do if you need to decide whether someone's health situation requires violating Shabbat to save their life? And it says, well, you ask a doctor, and if the doctor says it's necessary, you break Shabbat. And then a subsequent commentary comes in and it's like, well, what if there's not scientific consensus? One doctor says it's necessary and one doctor says it's not. And it says, well, you still violate Shabbat because you go with the more conservative doctor. And then it says, well, what if no doctor is there? What if you just can't get any expert advice? And it says, well, you still violate Shabbat because even doubtful danger to human life makes the law lenient. And then the final text in the series that Rabbi Fred quotes is from Yosef Karo in the Middle Ages. He says, the one who rushes to do this, the one who rushes to break Shabbat in a case of doubtful danger to human life, this is praiseworthy. But the person who stops to futz around and ask more questions, this is a murderer. So from this, I get not a specific guidance about how to respond to climate change in this moment, but sort of a general spirit of a fierce intervention, a fierce spirit of intervention, right? That Jews are people who do not stop and ask for any possible detailed question that might justify their not taking action. If life might be at stake, which it surely seems to be in this crisis of the climate crisis, we have to rush to get involved and not look for excuses to wait any further for any further clarification. Although the data, more data is good, Fred. Thank you for the good data. So in that fierce spirit of intervention, what does it look like to respond to the climate crisis as Jews or as people of faith? For the communities that we work with across the region, there are three components. And one is the kind of conversation we're having tonight, opening conversations about climate change as a moral issue in the communities where we get meaning and have our lives have rhythm. And then the second category we call greening. So finding ways to walk the talk, like putting solar panels on the TI roof and building rain gardens and thinking about doing those kinds of things at home as well. But I just want to put in a plug for the kind of conversation we're having tonight, the focus on changing policy. For me, that's a third critical component of responding morally, ethically to the challenge of the climate crisis as a faith community. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is this is a global problem, and it can feel really overwhelming to be responding to it in small ways when it is a huge problem. If you are just changing light bulbs in your own house, even if you're just putting up solar panels on the roof of your synagogue, in your heart, you know that that's not big enough to tackle a global problem. And so I feel that I have to be part of a larger movement that is making system change in order to feel hopeful. I need it for hope. And I would invite each of you tonight who are joining us to hear about the different campaigns that are being described and find one that you can join and find one that you can be part of, because you have to be part of something big to feel like we can meet this moment, which is a huge problem. And it's a way of not being alone in this crisis. This crisis can be very isolating for folks and very, it can be lonely to think about the climate crisis and to confront it on your own. But if you're joining a global movement that's responding together, you'll be in community. And that's what we're finding over and over again with IPL's work, is that people are coming together across boundaries that might have kept them apart in the past to respond to this challenge that we face as human beings. You're going to hear a little bit about federal opportunities to take action tonight, but I'm going to share some of the local ones that we're most excited about. We found it's so meaningful and exciting to participate in local level advocacy. So in Washington, D.C., there's work afoot to really tackle methane gas, which some of you might call natural gas, which is one of the sort of most important fossil fuels that we're still increasing and still using more and more, even as the evidence accumulates that it's a very serious climate pollutant, and it traps something like 80 times more heat than carbon dioxide. So just thinking about moving our infrastructure away from gas, thinking about holding gas companies accountable for climate goals, that work is ongoing in DC, and if that interests you, please connect with us. And then in Maryland, we're right in the middle of the Maryland legislative session. And I'll run through a few bills that are in action as we speak. One is called the Climate Solutions Now Act, which is a series of has different components, including tree planting and other things related to energy. It's all sort of making sure that Maryland's recovery from the pandemic and the, is one that advances our climate goals. It's looking good in the Senate and needs help in the House. We are working on the Coal Community Transition Act, and you'll have an opportunity to take action on that at the end of our call tonight. That is about making sure that Maryland shifts completely off of coal-fired power. There used to be 6 plants left Now they've all but one have announced some kind of timeline for closure, but we don't want them to just shut down suddenly and screw the workers over. We want to make sure there's a transition and a vision for making sure that Maryland moves to a coal-free future in a way that's just. That's the Coal Community Transition Act. They've had hearings on both sides, but no votes yet in the committees, and we are speaking up. There's a bill to improve transit, Transit Safety and Investment Act. Again, very much still moving in the legislature, and we can speak out. There's a goal to eventually amend the Maryland state constitution to guarantee a right to a healthy environment. This is more of a visionary project. It's had 2 good hearings, but probably won't come back until next year. And finally, there's something called Montgomery County Community Choice Energy, which is about letting Montgomery County as a county purchase clean energy, 100% clean energy. And that is also looking good, but it helps when Montgomery County folks speak out in support of it. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to keep chatting later about how we can support each of those bills.
Thank you, Joelle. We're going to turn to Devorah. Devorah, can you tell us about the work of the relatively new Jewish Earth Alliance and why the mission is so compelling?
Yes, thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Fred and Joelle. Joelle's IPL. Most of you are very familiar with IPL and the name and the work that they do. But we're the new kids on the block, Jewish Earth Alliance. And it started because, when I moved back to Washington, I was, as Joelle said, there are like 36 faith-related environmental groups. And I found that very confusing, and that there were so many different ones. I wasn't sure how to, which one to choose. But my colleague, Mirla Goldsmith, moved from New York to Washington, and she said, why isn't anybody going to Capitol Hill? We're in Washington, for God's sake. And we started going to a group called WISC, the Washington Interfaith Staff Community, which was a consortium of like 40 people from 40 different religious groups meeting on climate. They meet on, they have different committees meeting on different topics, but this one was meeting on climate. And we really had a very quiet voice there. There was not often someone representing the Jewish voice there at all. And sometimes there was somebody from the RAC, but it was an intern who might be there for 3 months or so. And we both felt that we needed to have some presence on Capitol Hill. And so Mirla and I founded Jewish Earth Alliance only a couple of years ago. And we formed a consortium of small Jewish groups around the country. Many of them are called Jewish Climate Action Networks. So they were green groups that were already in existence. And we wanted to amplify the Jewish voice, to regularize the action, because it's great to go to demonstrations, but they're not that often. We wanted to do something that was regular and timely, and we wanted to create relationships with congressional representatives for people around, for Jews around the country, to amplify that voice and to create, to develop relationships with them so that they had a two-way communication. And we did this even knowing that there was very little hope of anything passing in the last couple of years on climate on Capitol Hill. We knew that we had to start laying the foundation for developing these relationships, both with Jews around the country who were activists on climate and with congressional representatives. And so in this, so the first year we were, every month, we have an action alert on a particular piece of legislation. We have meetings, the green groups hold their meetings and they write letters together. And in these letters, they thank their representatives for any work they may have done, but they put a personal story about how they are connected to the climate issue. And we would collect these letters. Either they were sent to us by email and we print them out, or they were mailed to us, and we would gather these and divide them between the offices. And we were getting a couple of hundred letters and delivering them to 40 offices on Capitol Hill. And then the pandemic hit. And so we couldn't go to Capitol Hill. So we started doing things on Zoom. And, you know, I know that the Jewish voice got quiet on the climate issue because we were so distracted by so many other issues, you know, Jewish sustainability, anti-Semitism, all sorts of elections, civil rights, pollution. And there were a lot of green groups who deal with pollution issues on local and state issues. But there was really no voice going to Capitol Hill Jewishly. And so we have been really excited that we now have a couple of dozen groups around the country in about 20 states. And on Zoom, we have the benefit of being able to organize meetings with the congressional representatives or their staffers on climate, with people around the country, with these groups around the country, so that the constituents can actually be in on the meetings that we were holding with members of Congress when we went to Capitol Hill in person. And so that has even made the relationship between constituent and representatives even stronger. So we're pretty excited about that. Zooming didn't really, it gave us an added benefit. We have seen a real uptick since the election, that I think, you know, people were very weary and they were working on the election, but because of the success of the election, and because now we have a dream team in the White House. So our focus is in the next stage is to focus on climate skeptics in Congress. So we want to go to those states and groups where we really want to start to put more pressure on conservative congressional representatives to change their minds, to see the writing on the wall and see what's going on with climate and stop resisting. And you know, now it's very tied up with COVID and with economics, and our feeling is that underlying all of these issues is climate. It's climate now, and it's going to be climate in the future. One story I wanted to tell, so people will say, well, you know, why should we bother in Montgomery County, in Maryland? We have very progressive representatives. They have 90% ratings with climate organizations. But we were visiting with Senator Van Hollen's staffer on climate last week, 2 weeks ago. And we were talking about, our action. So every month we have an action alert. And so this month we had last month we had an action alert on the Tongass forest, that the roadless rule, that the previous administration had opened up the largest temperate rainforest in the world to lumbering companies. And we had an action alert for that. And we went to Van Hollen's office and talked to his climate staffer and said, we want you to co-sponsor this bill. And she said, well, you know, we haven't really looked at it because it's, you know, it's not in Maryland, so it doesn't really affect us. And Mirla said, but it's the Amazon of the Northern Hemisphere. And the staffer stopped and said, oh, we haven't really thought of it that way. And I'll talk to him about this, and we'll discuss this, and we can consider co-sponsoring it. And it made her stop and think. And we think that our representatives know everything and the staffers know everything, but they don't. They have way too much on their plates. And so they really are asking us, even the ones who are on board with us, they are asking us to highlight the things that are important to us. So I wanted to say that as far as a relationship with my Jewish spirit, I wanted to quote Rabbi Malka Klein about the Book of Esther. And she said that, you know, every year we read the book, the Megillat Esther, and it has a different resonance every year. And some years it doesn't have that much resonance. But she said that Mordecai says to Esther, do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. This is in chapter 4. And we can draw a parallel for us that we have to say to ourselves, do not imagine that we, of all humanity, will escape with our life, even though we may not live in one of the more vulnerable places right now, that we are living in very privileged places right now that at this moment are safe. But all we need to do is look at Texas, right? And so I see that in the Book of Esther, and that she had to act. She had to not hide. She had to act. And so that's how it, you know, I had, Fred and I had done as individuals, we had done all the right things to help with climate most of our lives. You know, we were vegetarians, we didn't use a lot of energy, blah, blah, blah. You know, we had a high miles per gallon cars, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that people would imitate us, but it didn't happen. And so we did things collectively, recycling and community and all that. But I realized with Mirla and forming Jewish Earth Alliance that institutionally we had to work, as our two other speakers said, we had to work on the bigger issues, the global issues, and get things going with legislation and with the Congress. So thanks very much, Naomi, for asking.
Thank you, Devorah, and thank you, all of you. Those were very, very moving remarks, and just very striking about how important this issue is to us as Jews and how important we are to the issue in helping to move it forward. I'm wondering, we sort of touched on this before with your remarks, but I'm wondering if folks wanted to say anything more about the policy landscape. We know right now that Biden's first push is really a very massive COVID, another stimulus bill, but obviously attention will soon turn to climate. I'm wondering both federally and from a state perspective, what sort of policies do you all think might gain some traction over the next several months or year, whether it's related to energy efficiency, green energy, market-based solutions like a carbon tax or a cap and trade. Fred, you mentioned adaptation and resiliency. And so wondering if you could give us, we know it's obviously early with the Biden administration and with this Congress, but if you can give us any hints about what we should be looking for. Fred, did you want to go first?
Sure. I have no inside track on what they're going to be doing, especially on the Hill. Our shop is really one that is a science-based, and although we support the Office of Science and Technology Policy, we don't actually do anything but support the understanding and the necessary information. So, but I will say that my personal feeling is it's going to be very hard with this close Congress in both the House and the Senate to really get a lot of dramatic legislation passed. I'm more hopeful that some of the things that we saw were very effective under Obama 2 in his second term, where he picked up the climate challenge and set the stage for a lot of people in the federal government to learn and understand what the issues were, and for the agencies to actually start to take action that they can do through their own internal processes, through authorizations via the executive orders, really have made a big difference in getting a lot more activity and a lot more thinking about these issues that I think we're now going to be really these new executive orders and new authority from high-level support from the domestic climate advisor, for instance, Gina McCarthy, Janet Yellen, head of Treasury, is going to appoint a new climate advisor, the first in the Treasury Department at all. The Federal Reserve Board has also appointed a person full-time to help them understand and address climate issues. So on my side, I suspect that it's going to be very hard to get strong legislation passed. Anything like a carbon tax is death. But there are other levers within the government, such as requiring all the executive departments to develop these climate action plans, to embed in their mission and regulatory thinking how to cope with climate change. I think the issue of that I mentioned briefly earlier, the social cost of carbon, is a huge issue right now. It's a way that the entire federal government is required in everything they do to conduct a cost-benefit analysis before they spend money. So they have to weigh the benefits of taking a policy action against the cost of doing it. And you can, via that lever, you can make vast changes in what gets funded and what policies get put in place. And the big issue for a decade now has been how, in that structure of cost-benefit analysis, which has been around since Reagan in the 80s, how to include thinking about the future damages and future benefits of climate adaptation, and spending money on these climate issues when so much is uncertain. And in the last year, in our own interagency working groups, there's been lots of thinking about how to do this, and it's going to be a huge issue. This concept of the social cost of carbon is at the center of it. It's a weight that says we can project how much this is going to cost the country or the world moving forward, and it tips the balance from whether you're going to take action or not. And the value of that is highly dependent, let's say, on values. It's not a number that is just calculated and it's a hard number. It's very much how much do we value the lives of our grandchildren and other Jewish values. So I think that is really a core piece of federal action to watch over the next few months. Just this last week, they issued an interim value that changed it dramatically. They made it much more meaningful to taking climate action compared to the previous administration, which greatly devalued the social cost in the future of climate change, and have moved it up. But it has generated, for instance, just a paper this week by Nicholas Stern and Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winning economist, and Nicholas Stern, who was a very significant player in climate and economics for the last 20 years. They wrote a paper just this week saying that it's been calculated all wrong and it really needs to be done with values, not thinking that we could put a number to it. And they suggested a number twice the height, twice the size of what the current number is. And all of those pushes into the future to make, I think, going to make a tremendous difference in the ability of agencies, all agencies and all money being spent to make change on the ground, especially if we get an infrastructure bill, which I think is something that will pass. And if it does, then how the social cost of carbon in the cost benefit analysis discussion is going to really be able to drive a significant change. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Fred. And I'm going to kind of add another question in case Joelle and Devorah want to add that to their remarks, which is how can interested folks get involved? So what opportunities might there be for us to weigh in? And I know we're going to move toward actually being able to do some activity toward the end, but setting the stage for that, Joelle, what do you see moving and where do you think we can get involved?
Sure. So I did ask my colleague, I don't work on the Hill stuff, but I did ask my colleague today what he sees as the immediate short-term and medium-term opportunities for climate related things at the federal level. And he said that what they see coming up immediately is that there's going to be a current COVID package that's being talked about right now, and then there will be a climate and infrastructure stimulus package coming next after that. And in that first current package, there's reason to think there will be at least 3 components that are very of interest to climate advocates. One is that that the House version of that bill has $100 million for environmental justice monitoring and grants. Representative McEachin from Virginia got that in there in the House side. So it'd be great to talk to our Democratic senators about making sure that it stays in the Senate version, as well as funding for utility assistance and support public transit. Both of those are things that climate advocates can advocate for being a big part of that first COVID package. And then the one that coming after that may have some other elements that would be of interest to us. 30 million solar homes is a campaign that is on its way. And an exciting part of that would be prioritizing households currently receiving energy bill assistance. So they wouldn't have to constantly be getting help to, they sort of have a more permanent and sustainable solution to not being able to afford their energy bills. Improvements to upgrade the electrical grid so that it's more prepared for distributed wind and solar. Investing in water infrastructure, especially urban communities and indigenous communities that struggle to have safe, reliable water access. And then something called the Reclaim Act might be incorporated into that second package. That's about helping for a just transition for coal miners and others whose livelihoods are dependent on fossil fuels that are on their way out. So that was just to respond to your last question, Naomi. People always ask what's the one thing they can do. We get very agitated when we think directly about climate change and the climate crisis, and we were sort of like, well, what's the most important thing I can do is a question I get asked a lot. And I would just say, join with others. Like, we will give you several opportunities at the end of today to be part of groups that are going to call you to action over and over again. But the most important thing we can do about climate change is not to be alone with it. So, at the end of today, we'll invite you to either join the TI Green Committee or get connected to Devorah's network of national folks speaking out to Congress, or get connected to Interfaith Power and Light, the work we're doing on local issues. But whatever you choose, find a way to not just be one person doing one thing, but be part of a sort of standing group of folks that are going to stay in the game over the long haul as we get called to action over and over again into the future. Should I talk about our action opportunity at the very end now, Naomi?
Maybe Devorah can
Okay,
answer the question, and then we'll shift to that. But thank you. Devorah, what's
Yeah, it's interesting. Bill Gates has a new book, and he said the top 3 things that you can do to affect climate change is, number 1, vote, and number 2, bug the people who got elected. And that's exactly what Jewish Earth Alliance is doing, and IPL as well. And the third thing is put your money where your climate mouth is, both in divesting and credit cards and what you buy. And I don't know what is more Jewish theology in the social contract than what Fred was talking about, and Joel was talking about, the social cost of climate and the values that we hold rather than making profit, and how important that is in the legislation that we want to support. As Joel said, in just transition, in environmental justice. And so I think that those are the underlying values that we look for in all the legislation that we advocate for. But I like that Bill Gates thing: vote, bug the people that got elected, and put your money where your climate values are.
Thank you. I think we're going to open it up to questions. If folks have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will queue them up.
And so while we're waiting, let me ask 2 questions, one for Fred and one for Joel. So Fred, what can you say, if anything, about John Kerry's role in the kind of the international part of this? That all this infrastructure stuff is great, and if that happens, but a lot of it rejoining the Paris Climate Accord and the U.S. as a country coordinating with other countries. What are you seeing on that front? And then Joel, can you just say a bit more about the work that IPL does, the kind of examples of your stellar congregations, in terms of the kinds of things that churches and synagogues are doing in collaboration with you all? Examples.
Well, so John Kerry obviously is extremely knowledgeable and engaged in this issue for a very long time. And I think it's still way too early to know quite how this is going to work and how he's going to, it's always a problem at that level to coordinate across all the agencies and get everyone lined up so that they're all pulling in the same direction, especially as he's looking at, out from the United States, and then Gina is looking in on the domestic side of things and how to balance things. But there is a large suite of agencies that were engaged under Obama in the exact same kind of thing. And certainly my organization has in the law that set us up, one of our requirements is to support not only the international science activities, and we coordinate all the U.S. federal response and support the Department of State in all of the activities with the IPCC international assessments, but also we get engaged in supporting other countries that lack the capacity that Europe does or the United States and Canada. And one of the things that I've seen in the 10 years I've been in this position is the interest and the capacity across the federal government to really do that is quite limited. Very patchy, nothing sustained. We had a short engagement, for instance. Naomi would be interested in DRR, disaster recovery and resilience in the Caribbean after their big hurricane season last year. And, you know, it just fell apart. There was just no real driver at State Department and no real incentive to make some of these things happen. No support from Congress to provide funding and resources to work across South America or across Africa. So I'm hopeful that Kerry will be able to, by having been a senator and then now leading the State Department and now in his position, will be able to pull together and pull the levers of power and leverage the kinds of information that our intelligence community also needs. They've come to us in the past, but it's been very patchy, and it's individuals reaching out rather than sustained systemic engagement to get them to understand their science needs and support it. So I think he's going to be able to make a lot of progress in a way that just no one's tried before, because there's been no one really responsible and motivated. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, some questions. Thank you, Fred. Some questions have come in. There was a question about us rejoining the Paris Accords, and also some questions on what can we realistically accomplish in Congress given the slim margin. Does anybody want to address either of those?
That is a problem, that there's a slim margin, but we are hopeful. As I said, our strategy is in the next year is to organize in areas that are more conservative, that have more conservative representatives, and to engage their constituents to write compassionate letters to the representatives, and also for us to arrange meetings with the representatives and their climate staff to convince them, to lobby them that they have an interest in providing a just transition for their constituents and environmental justice for their constituents. And you know, in areas that are coal-based, the writing is on the wall. Coal is dying, not because of climate regulations, it's dying because it's a dying industry. And they need to do something to transition those people to jobs that pay decent income. And so we're hoping to make inroads there. And then there was the question, what can we do when our reps are sympathetic Democrats and there's so many fossil fuel Republicans? We get that question a lot, like, why should, you know, us in Montgomery County, you know, we got Jamie Raskin, you know. As I said, they're not perfect. That we got Van Hollen to sign on to the Tongass bill because they just hadn't done the research, because they didn't think it applied to them. And also Jamie has told us, please keep sending those letters, because I use them to talk to my colleagues about these issues who are resistant. And the personal stories that people put in them are very moving. And so he has asked us to continue to send, and also they want the support. They need the support. So we still have a job to do, even though we may have progressive representatives.
Thank you. I'm looking at a question that came in from Bob, specific to Fred, but I think it speaks to really many of us who have been in the federal government the last several years. Frankly, it's been really rough. And many people did retire, and now we clearly need to staff up. Fred, I don't know if you saw the question come in from Bob, but it's sort of like, how did you survive the last 4 years? And what about all those folks who have left? Are they going to be coming back now that we can actually work on these issues?
So, Bob, mentioned our office. Our office didn't see large numbers of departures. In fact, we've maintained the same size. A lot of young people come through our office. Not too many more senior people like me, but those of us who are there have stayed. Partly, with discussions among ourselves, is exactly the kinds of things that you would think, are we enabling the administration, or are we fighting by being at the table and being able to stand up and say what the reality is? And so most of our people, and I would say this, we have many working groups and interact with federal program people, federal employees across many agencies. 13 are part of our core group, but we have partners across everything. We expected to see a big dip after the election in people coming to our meetings, standing meetings, things that we do on a regular basis and have done. And we actually did not see that at all. We have every year an annual meeting of everybody, over 120, 30, 40 people. For a day or 2 day meeting. And that first year and the second year, the third year, and this last year, it was the same. So I found that very heartening. Some people did absolutely leave, but for the most part, people kept at their work. There were issues, as Naomi mentioned, of people choosing self-censorship in ways that kept them below the radar. I went to a meeting of a big meeting that was run by the Department of Defense, and instead of calling it climate change and defense infrastructure, they used the term of art of non-stationary weather to talk about climate change. And so, people still did the work and still knew what they were talking about, but they were able to still get a lot of work done, and a lot of thinking in the last year about the election, and then people thinking about, well, what will we need to do, and ideas when this new team comes in. So I think that some people are coming back. I have a colleague from state who left and is coming back, and talked to several other colleagues who are coming back. And certainly you see John Kerry coming back, Gina McCarthy coming back. I would include them. So there are a lot of people from the Obama 2 era coming back in. And I think they bring a lot of expertise, especially on the energy policy side of things.
Great. Thank you for that. And Devorah, I'm wondering, maybe you can take the question from Sheridan Newmark about climate deniers. It sounds like that is going to be a focus of the Jewish Earth Alliance. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Fred's better at dealing with this. I mean, yeah, I'm just looking at the question. I just wanted to say that one of the issues about representing, being represented by progressive people is that they are being bombarded by lobbyists from big industries all the time that are anti-climate change. And so we need to balance that out as best that we can with the, the fact that we're all volunteer army. Yeah, I'm speechless
Can I get
about
it?
people who don't get it. I mean, we try, it's similar, I guess, to the election, the work that people did on the election. That when we were in those phone banks, we didn't call people, we called progressive people who we knew were progressive, because those were the people we wanted to come out to vote. And I'm not sure that there is still, how did you describe it, Sheridan? Not accept a large segment of our population. And, people have been saying it's not a matter of facts anymore. It's really more a matter of stories. And so we rely on telling personal stories about how we confront climate change and how we feel about our grandchildren and the world that they are going to inherit. And Fred has always been saying, well, we've been putting these facts out there, Al Gore put these facts out there, and look what it did. It didn't do much of anything. And so there is a feeling among psychological climate people, psycho-climate people, that facts is not going to help. Facts are not going to help. I mean, not that you shouldn't be continuing your work, Fred, please do. But that is not what is pushing people. Having a freeze in Texas is going to both support people who say, what are you talking about about global warming? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but someone has to explain to them the facts of the Arctic boundary being broken and all that. But having icicles come through your fan, this is an emotional thing that has got to change some minds. It's got to change some minds.
I think that's why your storytelling,
Exactly.
Right.
That's why it's so important. That's why we highlight it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's we, as scientists, generally, when you're talking to someone who doesn't speak your language, as people, what do we often do? We just yell at them louder, tell them the same thing louder. And scientists do that too. And what they do is they just show more data. And so it doesn't work in either case. And we've learned that, we've all learned that when we travel abroad. And we've learned that in science, that more facts doesn't often convince people of things. So yeah, I think it's, as Devorah said, it's all about the stories, and we try to do that in the work that we do, is to motivate it by things that people care about. What we call a risk-based framing is, what do you care about the most? And then how is that going to be impacted by not just climate change, but by all the other things that affects the thing that you care about. And so a lot of our thinking is around communications and how to do that better, and to leverage the latest social science to improve how we get that information out. A lot of it has to do with people working on the ground directly, one-on-one, and building trust. Trusted voices are critical, like Joelle, and not the scientists. Scientists, unless they live in the community, if they just parachute in, and whether you're a scientist or whatever you are, you're not going to be that person who will be trusted. You're not going to be someone who will be sustained in the community, who will care about the community. And that's what people are looking for in whatever kind of human endeavor we do. And it's true, therefore, also for the climate issue.
Are
And
clergy a trusted voice?
I think in many cases, yes. and its voices. One of the U.S.'s most renowned climate scientist is an evangelical Christian and has actually written a book about her experience talking to those communities. She's a close colleague of mine, and she makes a point of going into her own community and talking about what she sees and putting it in a context and a frame, as we call it, of the way they see the world. And I think that's what we all need to be doing.
Mhm. Joelle, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been opening conversations with regular people sitting on circles of folding chairs in church basements about climate change for over 10 years. And I think the most important thing that to understand, so there are actual social scientists of climate change opinion. There's Annie Lazarowitz at Yale and Ed Maybach at George Mason. And they, if you're curious about this, you can Google the 6 Americas of climate change opinion. But the short version is that the number of Americans who accept basic climate science has been going up and up and up. And it's now something like 7 in 10 Americans basically accept climate science. But if you ask Americans how many Americans accept climate science, their estimates are way lower than 7 in 10. So, and likewise, 97% of scientists accept basic climate science. But if you ask Americans, what is your sense of the scientific consensus on this issue? They also estimate way lower than that reality. So we can do a lot by just breaking this, what they call the spiral of climate silence. If we're not talking about it and other people are not talking about it to us, and we're not opening these conversations in our communities, then we allow that perception that the consensus is lower than it is to persist. And so I just want to urge everyone here to open conversations about climate change. Practice doing it. Talk to the people in your life about why climate change matters to you. But know that when you're talking when I talk to a group like this one, or just a group of people and I'm just meeting for the first time, I am having the back of my mind that social science research that 7 in 10 Americans accepts this science now. Why are people resistant to this information? I think an important thing is that it has become a matter of identity. If you have a certain political identity, then you can't accept this science. Fred mentioned Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. She says you can never ask someone to become somebody else. You can only ask them to become more fully who they are. In other words, we never want to present climate science as something that asks people to leave their own identity behind. But the lucky thing is, absolutely everyone's values are the values we need to respond to this issue, right? It's a moral issue. So if you have a value of caring for your neighbors, then I can help you see how, in order to really care for your neighbors, you have to, think about the way burning fossil fuels is affecting your neighbors. So we don't have to ask people. That's why I'm so passionate about raising these questions and talking about this issue in moral communities, because if we can talk about, well, what are your values here in this community? Well, what are the consequences of the way we're pouring heat trapping climate pollution into our atmosphere? So what would it look like to really live out those values in this context? You are bringing people into more fully living out their own values. You're not asking them to be somebody else. You're asking them to be more fully who they are. And the final thought I just want to share, and we've several other panelists talked about the limits of science facts, in this issue. And I just want to just notice that we have feelings about this, right? This is like talking about the global irrevocable damage to the only Earth human beings have ever known, to the places that we love the most in the whole world, to our favorite species of plants and animals, maybe, going extinct and never being seen again in our generation. I mean, we're talking about rhythms of life that have, the Tu B'Shvat is traditionally at the first blossoming time for the almond blossoms in the land of Israel. First blossoming times are now several weeks earlier all over the Northern Hemisphere, because, we are unmooring like human civilization from these ancient rhythms that have been part of our lives forever. We're talking about future generations maybe never experiencing the kinds of like cycles of the seasons that we might have assumed would always be part of their lives. So the fact that this is upsetting information to confront directly and that people have feelings about it needs to be part of the conversation from the very beginning. I have seen so many times, if you open a conversation about climate science in communities and don't give people some space to process how unmooring and disorienting and upsetting that information is, there's a lot of, people push it away because they don't want to feel those feelings. So I think the more we can talk about climate change in communities like TI, where we talk about the things that make us grieve and make us, that we support each other through hard things. And I think the more we can have language of emotion and feelings and grief be part of the conversation from the beginning, the easier it is for people to take the science to heart. So I just want to, and I want to say to every person listening tonight, there's, when you said, who are the best messengers, there is some community, there's some group of people for whom you are the best person in the world to talk to them about climate change, right? There's somebody for whom you are the world's best messenger, or there's some community where you're really like respected and important to them and you're the best messenger. So please think about, who are you the most powerful person in the world to talk to about climate science, and think about, we all are the best messenger for somebody. So who are those people that we can convince or that we can engage?
And, just to take it the other direction, away from the moral and social dimensions, is, on a large level, people can make money at this. And, Texas is a major place for renewable energy these days. And so they don't have to, everyone doesn't have to be convinced for us to make a lot of progress. I think that's one of the things that you're seeing, is that people can put up on their farms and in places where they have access to wind turbines, and make money. And so we're going to see things that are being put in place, regardless of whether everyone is convinced. And I think that's also a component of this that brings hope, is that now we actually have a path forward to the climate crisis, and the solution of being able to generate energy. And businesses are on the move. We see that in the interest of the Treasury Department with Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve across the planet. Businesses are starting to see opportunities here. We see a path to substitute energy sources that are renewable and not carbon releasing in ways that a decade ago were still pie in the sky. And so I think even if we can't convince everybody and convince them soon enough, these economic opportunities and economic choices, LED bulbs becoming cheaper and more available, people just do it. And I think we saw that from the environmental from a whole range of things from the 70s and Earth Day moving forward, is that if you make the solutions easier for everybody to incorporate into their normal life, and a path where they don't have to go back to living in caves, as was called 20 years ago as the solution to climate, we'll all move faster together to get there.
Thank you very much. And I think that we actually have a chance tonight to, for those interested, to actually take a little bit of action. Andrew, you wanted to introduce Carla, I think, and then we're going to move into an activity right now together.
Yes, I do. So thank you, Naomi. Thank you to all the speakers. And I'm pleased to introduce my co-sponsor for this event, Carla. Gone. Where is she?
Yeah, I'm right here. Can you see me?
Oh,
Or at least hear me? This is a
I can hear you. Okay.
this,
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Hi, this is Carla. I'm here representing the Green Committee, and I want to make a plug to continue this conversation in the Green Committee, and I would like to invite everybody to join us as we figure out how we're going to take some policy action together. I've been talking to Devora about doing some letter writing, but I wanted to join up with everybody to figure out what we can do next. And I want to thank Devora, Joelle, Fred, Naomi, and Andrew for putting this together, for putting together a fabulous conversation. And that's it. You'll be hearing more.
Great. So Joelle just put something in the chat. That is a really user-friendly sign-up form to get more information about any of the organizations featured today, and to find out how you can learn more about this issue. So please sign up on that Google Doc. And Joelle, I think you have an idea for us right now, right?
So here's how we're gonna end tonight. So first of all, we're gonna play a little bit of music, and we're gonna invite everyone to double click on the form in the chat and let us know how you can take action. We really would encourage absolutely everyone who listened tonight to do something to connect to a group that's gonna take action over time. That might be the TI Green Committee. It might be one of the organizations that the panelists engage with, but we invite all of you to do that. And we're gonna play some music to give everyone a chance to do that. And then when we come back, those who wish, especially Maryland residents, are going to be invited to take a photo petition on the spot. You can take action before you leave tonight. We're going to take a picture in support of the bill to ensure a just transition for Maryland's coal-fired power plants. And the art says that we envision we're going to light the way to a coal-free Maryland. So stay on the line after you fill out the form if you would like to participate in that action. And I am going to play some music to give us all our action taking time, starting now.
Well, you're on mute.
And there are two links, but they both work.
Unmute yourself.
Well, I'm not hearing music. There we go.
I
Hi,
Well, it's your-
everybody.
Okay, go
Thank
ahead.
you for
Go
taking
ahead.
action. Naomi, do you want to say anything before?
No,
We do
no,
an
I
action.
think we should transition.
I can't hear you.
Oh. Well, thank you everyone for joining tonight. I think it's clear we need to meet again and talk about this topic again. But it was great to have everyone here. And Joelle, do you want to explain what's going to happen next?
Yes, this is optional. This is opt-in. So if anyone wants to sign off or hide your video, that's fine. Anyone who wishes to be part of a photo, we're going to take. What we do with photo petitions is that we share them with our legislators, especially now. It's one of the best ways to remind a legislator that their constituents are paying attention and watching them, because they are. Hi, Stan. They are in the. They are, with pandemic, we can't, lobby in person as much, but they do watch Twitter. So if we can send them a photo of all of their constituents, letting them know that we are paying attention, it really does make a difference. So the Coal Community Transition Act is before the Maryland legislature right now. It's had a hearing on both the House and Senate side, but no committee votes yet. And it would ensure a just transition for the last few coal-fired power plants in Maryland to make sure that we both move in the direction of a clean future, a coal-free future for Maryland, but also do so in a way that does right by workers and those employed by the industry right now. So if you're comfortable being part of that photo, so we had an artist, I actually have the art in my house, it's right behind me, but we had an artist, we commissioned an artist in Clinton, Maryland to make a painting of her vision of a coal-free Maryland. And then we invited congregations around Maryland to download the color in version and then take their own pictures. And we had people take pictures with their Advent lights and their Christmas trees and their Hanukkah candles and their Kwanzaa candles, and all kinds of people that took them we had a group take their pictures with their house plants for Tu B'Shvat and this image, and then we've been sharing it with the legislators. So I welcome any TI members that want to, if you live in Maryland and you feel like it, you could add to your Zoom name if you know how, like where you are located, but not necessary. And I am gonna take a group picture with this image, and then we can share it with our legislators to speak out in support of a coal-free Maryland. Everyone understand the plan? I think I'll say 1, 2, 3, and then it would be cool if we like light the way to a coal-free Maryland, like something fun with our hands, like lighting the way. Does that sound good?
There are a few people whose video is off, so if you want to turn your video on first.
Right, only if you want to participate, turn on your video now. This is your chance. And I need to get ready to do a screenshot. And I'll say 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. TI. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Yay! Clean energy future for all.
Hey.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Now you've taken action before you left tonight. Doesn't that feel good?
That's amazing.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers.
Yes.
Thank you to Deborah, and thank you to Naomi for moderating, and thank you to everyone for showing up. And we will do this again in a few weeks, probably the next, we have incredible talent at Sefereth Israel. And so Stan, want to do health policy?
Yeah, sorry.
Do you want to do
Oh my God,
Yes,
yeah.
you want to do health policy?
Oh my God, yes. People
All right,
know
we'll be talking. That's next.
store for us. Definitely. There's amazing things going on. And it's totally
Terrific.
Not anymore.
Terrific. Okay, we can start right now. It's only 9 o'clock. We can go.
That's right. Great beard, Stan.
Sherry, thank you.
here.
Right.
Sherry, thank you for producing, and good night, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Mom and Dad.
Ah, your mom and dad. All right.
Thank you. Good night. Shavua tov.
All right.